have permits for over 20 gigawatts of new wind turbines, which is like a success we have not seen at that scale before.
Hello, and welcome to the very first episode of The Onshore Perspective, Wind Europe's brand new video podcast where we zoom in on what's happening in onshore wind across Europe and how national policies are shaping the sector's future. And what a better place to start than Germany, a country that's been blowing strong in wind energy. To help us unpack the latest twists and turns, I'm joined by someone who knows the German wind scene inside out, Mirko Moser-Abt, Chief Policy Officer at BWE. Mirko, great to have you here. Ready to talk about the land of beer, bratwurst, and big turbines?
Absolutely. Pleasure to be on board for the first edition of this new Wind Europe podcast.
Okay, so onshore wind is not an afterthought in Germany, right? I mean, it has generated 22% of electricity consumed in the country in 2025. And with a cumulative installed capacity closing in on 70 gigawatts, that's more than any other European country by a long shot. So for context, Spain, the runner-up, has only about half of that. And the sector also employs about 140,000 people, give or take. So not too shabby, I'd say. But the sector has gone through ups and downs. So, Mirko, let's start with a quick history class. How did Germany become Europe's wind powerhouse?
By the lack of alternatives, I would say. If you're really going back in time, you should focus on the German anti-nuclear movement. There's probably a lot about to unpack where the anti-nuclear movement comes from, but the first push into renewables was driven by the political will to exit nuclear energy. So when the first red-green left-leaning government was elected at the turn of the millennium, they decided to have the so-called German Renewable Energy Resources Act, which was basically for all kind of renewables, but also the first wind turbines and solar, basically for them to be connected to the grid. And the important thing, and which was totally new legislation, was that there was a right to be connected to the grid, and there was a priority given of the usage for this energy, in addition to fixed feed-in tariffs. So if you were to build a wind turbine or solar power, you would basically have a guarantee that this could be operated for 20 years. And you would be remunerated with like a fixed price for all this duration. And then we had over the last years, basically over the last 20 years, I would say ups and downs, depending on the political climate, on whether a new government wanted to re-enter nuclear energy or not. But the expansion has been going ever since. And very important to mention is probably that when all this started in Germany, as I mentioned, it was not motivated by the will to combat climate change. That was back then probably seen as a positive side effect of the expansion of renewables. But this is why we exited nuclear before the end of lignite and coal energy. So in hindsight, you could have done this differently, but the political will back then was to exit nuclear first. And now that the climate question is more urgent than 20 years ago, this obviously adds to the political will to continue with wind energy. But maybe to close this point, new geopolitical developments, looking to Russia, looking to global volatile energy markets, and the question from which reliable, hopefully democratic partners can we get our energy, has led basically all the political German establishment to acknowledge that there is no alternative to renewables, as we need to diversify and produce the maximum amount at the lowest possible cost domestically in Germany, but also within the European Union as part of the Energy Union.
Yeah, energy security, in other words. Okay, well, let's fast forward to today. Germany onshore wind sector is back in a fast lane, and in 2025 alone, 5 gigawatts of new turbines went up, which is a level that hadn't been seen since 2017. And this didn't really happen by accident, right? So the previous traffic light coalition, led by the center-left SPD, did set the stage with Robert Habeck, former economic affairs and climate minister from the Greens. They reformed permitting, declared renewables an overriding public interest, and told every German state to allocate 2% of their land for wind by 2032. So my question to you, Mirko, is can you break down what this measure actually mean in practice, and how do they turn policy into real world turbines?
Yeah, probably to go back to the numbers you were just mentioning, the sector was really working hard on breaking the 2017 record. We were a few hundred megawatts short, but I can promise that we'll beat that record in 2026. We're aiming for 8 gigawatts of onshore expansion, so we are pretty confident that we will definitely catch up on the 2017 numbers and have even higher numbers in the coming years. Yeah, going to the Traffic Light Coalition and its reforms. The coalition back then in the summer of 2021 was really elected on the promise of getting climate protection going. They were assessing the situation, recognizing that, renewables are there, but the regulatory framework is no longer fit for purpose. And as in many countries, in Germany, there's been the question of the availability of land. So where do you put all those wind turbines? And they came up with and this is probably the most significant of all the legislative measures put in place. They came up with basically a concept pushed by our organization for over 10 years, the 2% availability of land law. And the idea is that you have a responsibility sharing. The idea is that every of the 16 German states, okay, the state states, like for example Berlin, which is densely populated, got exemptions, but all the others, in average, have to allocate 2% of their land to wind energy. One could argue, yeah, but it makes more sense to build more wind energy in the north. Yeah, probably the levelized cost of energy is a little lower in the north, but at the same time, if you were to factor in all the grid, like the transmission grid from the north to the south, this would not make basically economic sense. So there is a strong financial incentive to build wind turbines, like looking at the system cost in the south as well. And the 2% law really got that going. There are some states that were faster, others need a little bit more time. You cannot yet see it in the numbers, but the southern German states are now catching up, which is really, really necessary and long overdue, given the energy intensive industries in the German south. So we finally got the expansion going all across the Federal Republic, which is really good. Then there's the overriding public interest. It's not a hard-hitting provision changing things from one day to another, but this was the state basically telling all the administration authorities that this is now the moment, this is an objective of the state. It's no longer nice to have, but we really need this. And this, in a lot of cases, changed the logic and the approach of the permitting authorities. And if projects which end up in courts and being challenged for probably legitimate reasons, but still, if it was a balancing decision and a balancing verdict would have to be taken in those cases, the courts nowadays rule normally in favor of the wind turbine project. And then obviously as part of the whole thing, there's the speeding up of permitting. We've gone through all the permitting legislation, especially when it comes to repowering, but also to greenfield projects. When it comes to biodiversity protection, we've standardized, obviously far from what we would love to see because there's still a long way to go. But when we look at the numbers, also the permitting times that have gone down, I think you could really say that the measures of the former government have really been a success. That's now visible in the permitting numbers. We'll probably touch upon that later as well, but we have permits for over 20 gigawatts of new wind turbines. Which is like a success we have not seen at that scale before.
Yeah, and just probably to touch upon the permitting times, if I'm not mistaken, you reached something like 16 or 18 months. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the average value, but still we are a federal republic. So if you go deeper into the data, there are regions or states like Bavaria, the often scolded Bavaria, which doesn't have a lot of wind energy yet, is very quick. There it takes only like a bit over half a year to get a permit, while in other regions it can be up to 30 months.
Because there's more backlog, essentially.
This is partially backlog. Sometimes also a little bit a lack of political will, but most states are right on track. The numbers are going, so the permitting duration numbers are going down in all regions of Germany. They're just the
Yeah, I
fast
mean,
movers like Bavaria that are setting the example for the whole republic.
yeah, I mean, in other countries, we're talking about several years. So I think 18 months or 16 months is a very great achievement. Okay, so let's stick with politics, because now Germany has a new captain at the helm, Chancellor Friedrich Merz, from the center-right CDU, and a junior coalition partner, the SPD. But Mertz's team already stirred the pot a little bit when it comes to onshore wind. They're talking about revising the overriding public interest principle, the 2% land target, and even the expected 2030 electricity demand. So, Mirko, what's going on here? Are we looking to a gentle breeze of change or a full-blown headwind for onshore wind?
I would rather say they're floating ideas that will hopefully not materialize to the same degree, because they are very intelligent people in all those parties, having a thorough understanding of economic policy and especially the energy markets. The thing is that the mood has shifted to some degree in Germany, as in many other countries. Questions of affordability are on the table, and the whole German economy basically, with a sense of longing, is looking back to the years of 2014, 15. We still had Russian gas, and when energy prices were way lower, and everybody kind of wishes to see the same cost as back then for energy prices. And unfortunately, falsely, sometimes has come to the conclusion that renewables are to be blamed for higher energy prices, although we have been in so many studies proven that we are the ones really lowering the energy costs, and also during the price spikes, consequence of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There are numerous studies that have been published that show that the spikes would have been much lower had we had about 10 to 15 gigawatts more of renewables. So what we really have to do now is look at the fine tuning of the current regulatory framework. And as I said, because the mood has shifted a little bit in some in some groups of people, you might score points by hitting against renewables. But we all know that this is not the way, and the people in charge understand that a very tailored and very targeted fine tuning will take us forward, but not the full blown stop that sometimes being circulated in the media, because it always also makes good headlines sometimes. So I
Yeah.
wouldn't look at it so negatively. We have challenges ahead, especially when it comes to grids and flexibility. We're working on this with the government. It's all about system cost and affordability. And we're confident of getting there, even though this might be 2 or 3 intensive years where we have to look each other deep in the eyes and ask ourselves how we want to develop the system, by at the same time holding cost for the industry, like for the consumers, low. But this is also why the German government has now put into place cheap electricity for the big consumers, in order to ease the pain until the system is ready and we've put in place all the grids and flexibility, and the overall cost is being stabilized.
So quite a definition of energy transition, I would say. But talking about what you mentioned, system costs, I want to stick with the new government, and in particular with the new federal minister for economic affairs and energy. That's Catherine Reiche. I mean, she's got political chops and serious energy sector expertise, as she run E.ON's subsidiary Westenergie from 2020 to 2025, and that's an energy company distributing gas and electricity in 3 of the 16 German states. So my question to you is, what does her profile tell us about her likely stance on onshore wind? Should developers be optimistic or start stress eating pretzels? And one more thing, she floated the idea of extra grid charges for renewable energy projects. And what I want to know is whether this is just a minor tweak or could it hit developers where it hurts?
We're happy to have an energy minister that is basically coming from the sector and knowing the problems that we're facing. So it's very good to have not a total outsider, but someone having already dealt with those questions. At the same time, distribution system operators sometimes bring a perspective to the table that focuses more on the reliability of the grids rather on the development of the grids. So although everybody and the whole industry shares an absolute desire and focus on having stable grids, we have, as Germans, put so many safeguards into place that situations like in Spain are not up for debate. That's totally impossible in Germany, given our current love for fine tuning and regulation and triple safeguards. And so the dilemma, the balance we have to find is to give the DSOs enough incentives and sometimes also a little bit of pressure to overhaul all their processes, to get the digitalization going, to have faster grid expansion, basically to provide us with transparency and insight where it is best to build new wind turbines. And the German grid is relatively old, so there is really a need to overhaul a lot of the of the distribution grid. So a lot of it will have to be taken down and just rebuilt as part of normal repowering like you do with old wind turbines. There could be a little bit more ambition on that side, and we're working with the government on really having the incentives for the DSOs increased so we get going on the grids, because that really is the bottleneck. And just putting extra levies on wind turbines, in our opinion, is not really the way to go. It might be a good idea to give incentives to go more to the places where there's probably grid connection available. At the same time, grid connection might be available in regions where it's not really economically viable to build more wind turbines. So although we understand the idea to make more efficient use of the grids, this is not necessarily something that will lower the total cost of electricity and the system cost, as the consumer will probably not see grid charges, or will probably not see more grid charges on the electricity bill, but that will then have to be priced in the auctions for wind turbines. So it's like putting money from your left pocket into your right pocket. It will not change the overall cost of the system, which is why we are in intense discussions with the government on how this can be tailored so that we get an optimized system cost rather than just hiding it in other kinds of costs. I just want to give credit to the current government, because there were coalition talks in autumn where they have agreed on sticking to the former government's expansion numbers. So there is no discussion of reducing the ambition of the renewables built out in Germany. The target of 115 gigawatts of onshore installed capacity by 2030 is still standing, which is very good. And that's giving us the long-term visibility and certainty that even though we're facing hiccups and challenges in grids and flexibility, there is the political will to solve those issues in order to allow for hopefully soon seamless integration of wind energy into the grids, thereby lowering overall electricity costs.
Got it. Okay, I suggest we take a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about the challenges ahead for the German wind sector. And trust me, there are a few gusts coming. So see you soon.
Looking to stay ahead in the wind energy sector? Wind Europe's intelligence platform has in-depth statistics, interactive data and maps, policy trackers and market reports, all updated regularly to keep you informed. Whether you're tracking turbine orders, exploring permitting trends, or diving into national policy development, the platform gives you the insights you need to make smarter decisions. Log in today and unlock the full power of Wind Europe's intelligence tools. Not a member yet? Contact us to find out more.
Welcome back. So, Mirko, Germany is smashing records in 2025 alone. You mentioned before over 20 gigawatts of projects were permitted, and more than 14 gigawatts won feed-in premium contracts in competitive auctions. But delivering all of this incredible volumes on time means that the system needs to run like a well-oiled gearbox. So take, for example, grid connections. Right now, the system is first come, first served. And this sounds fair, but it means that zombie projects, ones that will never be built, can block the queue ahead of solid projects. And Germany, as far as I understand, is debating a reform to fix this. So, Mirko, first question to you is, what's the average time, the average waiting time for a grid connection today? And what changes should developers expect from this reform that has been floated?
That's a very challenging question, as centralized data on an average, like, for example, for the permitting duration, where the authorities have to publish on how long it takes for them, is not really available, because a lot of projects are being discontinued once they get answers that just don't give them any perspective at that particular location. So I can only draw from anecdotes in some regions that you can probably expect a grid connection in 6 to 7 years. In others, where grid is more readily available, it might take just 1 to 2 years, which is totally fine given the timelines of the realization of our projects. And then it's really worth it pushing ahead with the project. And as you mentioned, the so-called zombie projects really are a thing in Germany. As the DSOs in the past have always operated on a first come, first come, first served basis. This has worked well in the past, but given especially the question about battery electric storage components and projects that could be connected to the grid anywhere, and that kind of benefit the system but still have an arbitrage value. So those companies, a lot of them new upstarts, have just put aside members of their companies just copy pasting grid connection requests and sending them out everywhere, basically in the hope of choosing from the best of 40 to 50 grid connection requests, and then building their battery electric projects there. Which is why we have all understood that this is a pressing issue. We need to sort the good apples from the bad ones. There are ideas currently being discussed, like in order to show the seriousness of your grid connection request, you have to deposit a certain amount of money as a guarantee, as part of the total project value, or to prove that your project is not just the idea that has been made up in the meeting room next door, but that you've been in talks locally, that you've secured funding, that you maybe have the contracts with the landowners in place in order to show that if you get confirmation from the grid operator, you're ready to get going, and the project will be flying within the next 2 years. So this is what we're currently discussing. Still, it's a paradigm shift leading to heated discussions within the sector on how to really sort out the bad from the good ones. But there's also all plays into the same big logic of digitalization. A lot of the DSOs, we have 866 of them in Germany, which is a striking number compared to our other European partners. If the DSOs were faster in their processes of basically approving or denying projects, and you would then give the companies just a few weeks probably to then confirm or just pass the slot on to the next company. If we were more digitalized, we could work us through this queue of projects even faster, thereby probably reducing the need to get going with really hard new measures that sort the good ones from the bad ones. But we're on it, and we're pretty confident that a package we expect to see in the next weeks being put forward by the government contains a proposal on how to solve that, a proposal we have also worked on and submitted ideas for in the past.
Great. And just perhaps to remind our viewers that in Germany, it is the case that most wind farms are connected to the DSO, so to the distribution system and not the transmission system. Is that right?
That is correct. It's not always the case, as the DSOs in some occasions are so slow. Basically, if they give us the perspective of 6 to 7 years, and the German wind energy sector is very Mittelstandsbased, with a lot of people that just want to get things going, sometimes also willing to try out new solutions that don't fit in the corporate logic of capital market oriented or stock market listed companies. So sometimes our members get together and they build their own but their own stations, basically pooling the electricity of several wind parks together, and then just asking the TSO whether there's a possibility to just connect it to the transmission grid. Yeah, so surprising solutions have been found in several places, and we're working also on regulation in order to allow us to build our own distribution grids that we can then pass on to the local DSO instead of having to wait for 6 to 7 years, because the experience shows that our sector has a lot of ideas, there are a lot of smart engineers, and in most cases, we're way faster than the DSO if we were allowed to build out our own grids and then just hand them over at building cost.
Got it. So grid connection is one set of the headwinds, but as you mentioned, the government is due to suggest some fixes to that problem. But another issue that it's getting worse and worse is that of negative prices in Germany. So to put this in perspective, negative electricity prices in 2023 accounted for about 300 hours. And in 2025, this jumped to almost 600 hours. So it almost doubled essentially. And solar PV, which now accounts for over 100 gigawatts of cumulative installed capacity, is often considered the biggest culprit of this negative prices. So as a general rule, when prices of electricity are negative, onshore wind farms do not receive any feed-in premium. So what is the ripple effect for wind farm operators, and what should policymakers do to keep the market balanced? More batteries, demand side magic, all of the above?
All of the above. You were mentioning the right answers already, and I'm really fortunate to be working for the onshore sector, which is the sector that's of all the renewable technologies, which is the one that's least affected by the negative electricity prices, as it's mostly caused by solar in summertime during the classic noon hours. Yeah, basically between 11 and 3 o'clock. So for us, it's a thing, but less of a thing than for the solar for our solar partners. But fortunately, we are working on it, and the fact that the solar partners are basically pushing so hard for regulation helps us tackling those problems before they ram us or affect us to the same degree. The solution to all of this is flexibility, 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 flexibility. This is just the basically the tipping point at the moment where we're going from the old electricity system to the new electricity system, and where the renewables really become the system setting the price. And we cannot, at the moment, all of our economy is still very unflexible, rooted and still, as I mentioned earlier, still mentally living in a time where the electricity was just coming out of the plug, as the old coal power plants and nuclear power plants were producing baseload all the time. And this readjusting for the consumers, including the big industrial side, to become as flexible as the production of renewables is really the challenge. And so we need to provide them with financial incentives so that they can change their systems to the degree it is like possible for them. And as I mentioned, put out a lot of battery storage capacity. And in addition, to allow our members, so the wind energy producers, also to get experimental behind the grid. So before you feed the electricity in the grid at those places, we need more legislative like leeway to come up with creative solutions. So there are a lot of ideas on this. It's just that legislation is not yet 100% up to speed, but we're seeing a lot of, not on a federal level, but a very technical process we're discussing with the federal regulator on how to improve double usage of batteries. It's very technical, but the idea of having pure batteries that only, for example, store green electricity or normal, like the gray electricity for the grid. So in order to really make use of the battery potential, you have to allow this double usage of having green and gray in the same battery, but keeping that clean and separated from each other just requires new ideas and probably also more liberal thinking about whether you have to account for the last kilowatt hour or whether you can work with approximations, which is not a thing the German mentality likes.
Got it. Well, and then
let me probably mention one of the ripple effects of solar as well, because this is kind of crucial, because it has, or the negative pricing hours, they really have effects on the German offshore market. Because in the past we had a lot of bids at zero cost. So basically the state was providing grid connection, but the offshore turbines were not asking for a feed-in tariff any longer. They were basically building it at production cost and then selling PPAs to big German off-takers. All the negative electricity hours in combination with the market values going down due to the very successful build out of solar have made the price of PPAs really go down, meaning this idea of building an offshore park and refinancing it with PPAs does not work any longer at the moment, which is why we'll be switching to CFDs as mandated by European legislation starting from, we expect, 2027, because that's when the European deadline runs out.
Yeah, crystal clear. So moving on to the third problem that I wanted to address with you, it's that of transport permits. This sounds almost like the last problem, but in the US, turbine manufacturers get permits in 3 days. And in Germany, let's just say that you could binge watch quite a few Netflix series before your permits arrive. So what is the hold up and what's been done to speed up things?
Yeah, the challenge is that Germany is densely populated. We have a lot of motorways, still a lot of them are relatively old. We have not been investing sufficiently in infrastructure, but still we are on track. The problem has been decreasing over the last years as some of the new established authorities that are in charge of regulating that have gone through their permitting processes and really sped up the time it takes them to process our requests. The federal states as well are more playing along with their own regulations and their separate permitting procedures. Also, the municipalities are on board. We're also going through a very steep learning curve at the moment because, as I mentioned, last year it was 5.2 gigawatts. Just 4 years ago, we were at a little bit over 1 gigawatt. So a lot of them just haven't had experience any longer. Obviously, if we want to build out over 10 gigawatts of wind energy per year onshore. This is gonna be complicated. And yeah, so everybody's going through a learning curve. There is a lot of pressure also on the respective permitting authorities for the transports to digitalize, to get faster. Everybody is going through the learning curve. So we are optimistic that this is not going to be the major challenge that we'll face in the coming years. So we can concentrate on grids expansion, build out, and flexibility.
So, I mean, what I'm hearing is that, yes, there are these three issues of grid connection bottlenecks, negative prices, and transport permits, but these are all been actively addressed by policymakers, and you sound somewhat reassuring in this sense, so that's good. But before we wrap up, I want to touch on something that I think is absolutely crucial as Germany keeps scaling up onshore wind. Local acceptance and community benefits. This can really make or break a project on the ground. And the context isn't getting any easier, I think. I mean, mis and disinformation about wind farms spreads quickly, especially on social media, and it's increasingly echoed by political actors, most notably those of the German far-right party AfD, which is expected to make significant gains in the 2026 state elections. And that kind of narrative can have real consequences for permitting, local politics, and long-term planning. So walk us through, Mirko, what community benefits schemes already exist in Germany to ensure that local residents actually see the value from nearby wind farms? And second point, if the AfD gains more power at the state level, how may this influence the development of onshore wind across regions they govern?
I'd first of all like to make an important point about wind turbines in general. In Germany, they're very much linked to the Green Party, and sometimes the energy transition, because it was kicked off by the Greens, is being portrayed as if it was just like a dream by the Green Party, but not necessarily something the whole economy and the whole country was needed, which is totally wrong, obviously, which is why all the democratic parties are on board for the energy transition. And if you need more proof, just look abroad. Look at the Chinese expansion numbers, or about the Texan farmers in Trump's America that are building out wind energy. They're surely not doing that because the German Green Party has told them to do so. So we really have to depoliticize wind turbines and just see them as the reliable, resilient local energy production at low cost that it really is. Although this is probably the actual challenge in the current, you could even call it energy transition culture wars that are happening all over the globe, and also in Germany as well. Going to the exact community benefits, it is really important that communities benefit from wind energy, which is why the German government, together with us, really has put in place measures. So there's the communal levy, first of all, rooted even in the federal code, so in the German Renewable Energy Sources Act, that says that new wind turbines should, per entity of energy produced, pay a certain amount of money to the local community where the wind turbine is located. For new turbines, that is between 25 to 30,000 euros per year just to have the turbines on the lands of that community, in addition to all the other taxes and maybe the money that the landowner receives. So even though you might not own a share of the wind turbine, you still get access to better roads, to better libraries, probably kindergartens, just because money from the wind energy is pouring into the budget of your community. Then we have on a state level different local participation laws in addition to what the federal government mandates. And there you have additional laws requiring wind energy developers to hand out certain shares of the windmill and basically of the wind turbine and to offer it to the people living close to the turbines. This has been a tradition in many German regions for many years. That's basically the community-based wind turbines or the community-built wind turbines. And in the region where this has not been the tradition, it's being rolled out through regulation, which really increases acceptance and has the people benefit from the energy transition as well. Because once they see the turbine spinning, they know that either their electricity cost is going down because they're benefiting from local schemes, or money is probably at the end of the year going straight into their bank accounts, which is a very, very good thing in our opinion, and probably helps even those people that are doubting the energy transition and wind energy expansion to see that, okay, they are probably not totally on board of the idea of needing an energy transition, but at least it helps to make their communities more financially viable and benefits them in their daily life. And to look at the numbers, this is where it really becomes interesting. The onshore still enjoys very high public acceptance in Germany. 70% of the populations are really in favor of the continued build out of onshore wind energy. And if you look even deeper into the data, the acceptance is even higher when people already have wind turbines in their surroundings. So it's always the same thing. It's the fear of the unknown, but knowing that there are turbines a kilometer away or even further away from your home and not being affected at all, just having that as part of the landscape really doesn't affect people experience with it at all to the same degree. So the places where you have wind turbines are more inclined to build even more because they just see the benefits also from the financial perspective of having very financially well-doing communities in stretches of the country that are probably or have been de-industrialized in the past. So wind energy brings new perspectives, and people are seeing that once they have the wind turbines in front of their homes.
And when it comes to the AfD, if they gain power at a state level, what could that mean for the development of onshore wind, given that this is a party that is traditionally against wind energy?
First of all, it is highly unlikely that the AfD is really taking over state governments, because all the other parties have ruled out to work together on forming a government platform with the AfD. So this is not something that's up to debate at the moment. And so we're not really considering those options as BWE. For us, it's important to showcase the benefits of wind energy. And we have situations where the mayor is from the AfD. And in those cases, so I can just speak from those anecdotes, in those cases, the AfD has proven very pragmatic, but still nobody wants to see this party in power, as their general approach to basically all fields of policy is just in total contrast with good common sense and democratic values and how to steer a country. So we're working on showing the benefits wind turbines deliver, and are expecting the parties that support wind energy to do well in the elections. But the thing, you're probably right, is that politicians need to take a stance and probably not shy away from the discussions about wind energy, but really put in good words and tell the people that if you want to have low costs of electricity, there is no good alternative to that. And so this is the best option we have on the table. You may not love it, but it keeps the cost of electricity as low as possible.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, well, it's time to wrap up things. We've covered the sector's revival, the new government's mixed signals, and ways that they are trying to fix some of the issues of the sector, and the challenges that lie ahead. So, looking forward, what measures should the government take during the rest of its tenure? And what is it that keeps you awake at night that industry representatives should be aware of?
The Germans want to leave a lot of things to the market, which is a good approach in most of cases. But at this time, even though focusing on the market, we need to give the sector a certain kind of visibility and planning certainty in the way we regulate the market. So we need predictability when it comes to, as you mentioned earlier, the extra levies, for example, that are being discussed for wind turbines in German, a very technical term called Baukostenzuschuss. We can discuss everything, but we need visibility and planning certainty. As we all know, you don't build a wind turbine overnight. It's a lengthy process that we try to shorten. But the less uncertainty we have, the lower the cost of the project, because uncertainty is always being priced in by the banks. We need to focus on grids, on flexibility. It's complicated, it's nerdy, it's not always the most pleasant subject, but that's what brings the system cost down. And this is what we as an industry want, to the benefit of the whole German industry, and the electricity prices affecting everyone. But we have the ideas, we have the plans, the projects, even proposals written by our own committees and lawyers and working groups on how to get this going. And we're looking forward to the discussions, because aside from all the heated exchanges we see sometimes in the press and in the headlines, we know that everybody's interested in having a reliable, low-cost green energy system. And after heated discussions, I think we will get this well on track.
Great. Well, Mirko, thank you so much for sharing your insight and helping us navigate Germany's ever-changing wind policy landscape. And to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, share it with your colleagues, subscribe, and join us for the next time as we explore yet another country in Europe's wind energy's world. And don't shy away from leaving a comment telling us what you liked, what we could improve, or what European countries you'd like us to feature as next. And until then, stay curious. Thank you. Bye-bye.